Welcome to LavaCon. In this session, Blaine Kyllo from Content Strategy Inc. teaches us how to set clear roles and responsibilities for content stakeholders using a responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed chart, otherwise known as a RACI chart.
Hi everybody, I'm Blaine Kyllo. I'm a senior content strategist with Content Strategy Incorporated. We're a consultancy based in Vancouver, Canada. My thanks to Jack and the LavaCon UX team for the opportunity to talk to you today about how you can smooth your content operation and your relationship with your content stakeholders by clearly setting out roles and responsibilities. We're all in the content business, so words are important. Words matter. And what words mean also matters. But in the content business, this word has always been a problem. Owner. I'd like you to listen to something. That was the Chicago Symphony Orchestra conducted by Riccardo Muti performing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which includes that exhilarating movement Ode to Joy. Who owns that? Well, it depends on what we're talking about. The music itself was composed between 1822 and 1824, by which time the German genius was completely deaf. But the score is in the public domain, so nobody owns that. The performance exists because of the efforts of the various musicians and the chorus. You could argue that they own their individual playing. And then there's conductor and music director Riccardo Muti, who brings the various pieces together. What does he own? It's not easy to determine who owns that particular performance of Beethoven's Ninth. And as an audience, we don't care. All we care about is that it sounds amazing. The same is true for your content. Your audiences, your users, don't really care who owns it. And I'm going to explain why trying to identify a content owner in your organization is a fool's errand. Going to the effort to assign an owner can be more trouble than it's worth, because in most organizations, nobody can agree on who should get authority to make decisions about content. Lines of business think they should own content because business goals depend on it. Subject matter experts know best how products and services work and the details around specific offerings, so they think they should own content. And marketing and comms teams are usually given control of content, so they figure it's theirs. That leads to the situation where everybody thinks they own content. There are simply too many people trying to guide the orchestra. The opposite situation is worse, because when nobody wants the baggage that comes with owning content, you end up with the musicians playing different songs at the same time. You don't solve these problems by telling somebody they own the content. Instead, you should ask, who needs to be involved in the content to make sure that it's effective? And when you ask that question, you see that there can't possibly be a single person who owns content. Writers create content. Writers are experts in knowing how to use plain language and proper grammar and punctuation, but they don't know everything. Trust me, I'm a writer. As much as I tell my kids I know everything, it's just not true. Writers often don't have the factual knowledge to know if what they've written is correct. And writers aren't programmers, so they have no idea about the code behind the scenes that brings all of the pieces together. Content that is effective, that has an impact, results from the efforts of multiple people, each with their own area of expertise. And if there's one thing we know, it's that letting experts do the things they are expert at is a key to success. But coordinating the effort of those experts is important. And that, I suggest, is what organizations are trying to do when they assign owners to content. They also want to know who to blame when things don't work, but that doesn't help us create, distribute, and manage good content. Instead of assigning an owner, we want to make sure that everyone who plays a role in content understands exactly what they need to do, and we can make that clear to everyone using a RACI chart. RACI is an acronym for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. These are the different levels of engagement that people can have with a particular task. People who are responsible are the ones actually doing the work. People who are accountable are the ones approving the work. They get final say. People who are consulted are people who contribute in some way to the work being done. They have insights about the subject matter or the content channels or even other things happening that might impact the content. And people who are informed need to know when the work is completed. We can create a chart that allows us to assign these to various roles for the tasks or activities they do. Consider the performance of Beethoven's Ninth. You've got a composer who takes care of some things. You've got musicians. I've used violinist, cellist, and timpanist just as a catch-all for the rest of them. In this case, you've got a chorus, so you've got singers, and you've got a conductor, and you've also got a producer. And then there are activities that need to be done for this performance of Beethoven's Ninth. The music has to be written, it has to be played, somebody's got to do some singing, and then there's a final performance that pulls everything together. Beethoven was responsible and accountable for writing the Ninth Symphony. If this was a contemporary composition, it's possible that the producer might be informed about the writing of the music when the person writing the music was doing that work. But in this case, Beethoven's been dead a long time. I don't think that the producer was around to be informed that the symphony was completed. And while the musicians are responsible for playing the music, the conductor is accountable for that. If the musicians play out of tune or out of time, the conductor is the person who tells them what to do, who fixes that problem and cracks down. And the same is true of the singers. The live performance, though, is the producer's job. They are accountable for the work that everyone does during that performance. And while Beethoven isn't alive to be informed that his symphony has been performed, that is something that normally would be communicated. Hey, Beethoven, we performed the Ninth Symphony the other day. People really liked it. Here's an example of a RACI chart for the simple task of writing some UX copy about a new product that will be translated into other languages. Let's just say that it's a telecom company creating a new web page for the new iPhone or Samsung Galaxy smartphone that's being released. This looks different in every organization, so don't be alarmed if it doesn't fit yours exactly. Note that we use roles, not job titles or specific names across the top of the chart. This is because sometimes people will play more than one role. In smaller organizations, your writer and your editor might be the same person. It's also because people come and go and they change positions, but the roles are static for particular jobs and deliverables. And sometimes you'll discover there's a gap on your team because you need someone to translate things into French or Spanish or Japanese, and you don't have anybody to do that. And for the tasks, again, this is just an example, but you've got to write the content, and there might be some revision of existing content to account for the new stuff. Content's got to be translated. It's got to be verified for accuracy and completeness, and the quality of the content needs to be checked. You're going to want to check tone and voice and brand to make sure that they align. And then there's the final approvals of the final deliverable. And one of the best practices for accountabilities is there should only be one person accountable for things, and there should always be someone accountable. If there's no accountability, the work might not get done because there's nobody to make sure that it happens. If you've got more than one person accountable, there will be confusions and breakdowns because there's conflict over who gets to make the final decisions on things. With responsibilities, you want to make sure that one or more people need to be responsible for actually doing the work. If one person has too many responsibilities, that might indicate that they've got more than they can handle. They might have more work than they can do. If there's too many R's for one task, that can indicate that you've got some inefficiencies in the process that maybe you can weed out. With consultants, several team members may be consulted, and this is two-way communication. This is asking for feedback or input. Note how many C's there are for each of the different tasks. If there are too many people being consulted, you could have long timelines and delays because you've got so many people involved, each with their own suggestions and opinions. If you don't have enough people being consulted, you might end up with content that is of poor quality, or worse, might be factually inaccurate because there's nobody to check those things. If a person is providing feedback, they're being consulted, not informed. Informed is one-way communication. And if you've got lots of eyes on your chart, you're going to want to develop communication plans to inform people according to a schedule and ideally using some mass communication medium. Looking at this RACI chart, you can see that there's no such thing as a content owner because all of these roles own something having to do with content. So the best way to define content ownership is to say that it's owned by the organization and that aspects of that content are owned by various roles. Your subject matter experts own the accuracy of the information. Your product manager owns the completeness of the content because they understand how this text connects to other content and other channels. Your senior editor owns the quality of the content. And maybe you've got a brand manager who owns the brand alignment and tone and voice. You can use the same RACI framework for all kinds of things. You can use a RACI chart to define roles and responsibilities for the way your organization implements content operations. You can even use RACI charts to set up campaigns and projects, and depending on the size and scope, these charts can get very extensive. And RACIs can be used at the beginning of the things like that to get everybody on the same page. But they can also be used as a diagnostic tool to determine where there might be breakdowns or opportunities to become more efficient. One organization we worked with was in a transition to digital. And when they built their first RACI, they realized they had 4 people doing the same job, and they had 6 people doing the same job in another task. Just look at the row for email and see. That used to make sense for this organization because each of those people had responsibility for a particular magazine. But in a digital environment, those tasks could be collapsed for efficiency. Here's what the RACI looked like after the organization reorganized how they did the work of content. There's now a shared accountability between the content strategist, a new role that was created, and the head of the marketing department. So how do you create a RACI matrix? Well, whether you're building a RACI to find efficiencies or to get your people aligned on how content operations work now, or you're creating a RACI in advance of something new, the best approach is to get all of those people in a room to construct the grid. There may be arguments, but working through them will help get rid of all that tension that exists in your organization from arguments you haven't yet had. And because you're involving people in this process and giving them a chance to contribute, you've got a better chance that they'll follow the RACI afterwards. And don't worry about the people you think are going to be offended when they find out that they don't own content. In our experience, most people are actually relieved when they realize they aren't expected to do things they aren't expert at, and that an actual expert will be taking care of those tasks. Clear roles and responsibilities are, for people working with content, very liberating. In this LavaCon session, I promised you a few things. I promised that I'd explain why trying to find someone to own content will not help with your content governance. Instead, you should identify the specific tasks that all people involved with content should be doing, and let people use their expertise. I promised that I'd show you what a RACI is and how to create one. You now know that it's as easy as creating a chart with roles across the top and tasks down the side, and assigning appropriate letters for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. I promised that you'd learn how to support content stakeholders. And now you see that by creating a RACI and socializing it, everyone involved with content can see what they need to do and what others are doing. And while I didn't promise anything about using RACIs as a diagnostic tool, you know that bringing together your content teams to create RACI charts with your current context in mind can tell you a lot about what's going on in your content operation. Combine RACIs with content processes, that's a topic for another day, and you're well on your way to having sophisticated governance. Because with a RACI in place, you'll be able to coordinate a group of people to make beautiful music, even when you're faced with constraints like needing to use a single instrument. Because everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do. Thank you for listening. Visit our website at contentstrategyinc.com for more articles on content strategy, content governance, and content operations. Maybe sign up for our newsletter. And I have a podcast that might interest you. Content in Practice is conversations with people doing the work of content about the challenges they face and the solutions they're implementing. I'm Blaine Kyllo. It was a pleasure being with you.